Hey World History students, Mr. Lassiter with you. And in this AP World History Test Review, we're going to be looking at time period 3, regional and trans-regional interactions from 600 to 1450. This is about 20% of your AP World History exam. So to help you through this information, in the description down below, I have linked a period 3 key concept review packet that'll help walk you through this information. If you need any other additional information or help, a couple websites that I like to go to are AP Worldopedia and Freemanpedia, which are good for even a teacher like me. And so I encourage you to take a look at two of those great AP World History resources. Let's go ahead and take a look at Key Concept 3.1, the first of the three major key concepts for this unit. This is about the expansion and intensification of communication and exchange networks. And that's just a fancy way of saying the expansion and intensification of trade networks. So the first thing that we see in this time period is that new technologies, new commercial practices are going to increase the volume of trade and expand the range of trade. This means that we'll see existing trade networks see larger amounts of trade and newly active trade networks develop. So let's start with our existing networks that you see here. First of all, of course, we have the Mediterranean trade network centered on the Mediterranean. We will see the newest of these networks, the Trans-Saharan network, which developed later in time period 2, the Silk Roads, which you were familiar with, and the Indian Ocean Maritime System. These will continue into this time period. But along the way, we will see that these existing trade routes, as they flourish, will promote the growth of powerful new trading cities. Some examples of these include Novgorod in Russia, Timbuktu in Mali, and several Swahili city-states along the east coast of Africa. In China, you'll see the city Hangzhou. In South Asia, the city there in the middle, Calicut, and on the right, the round city, Baghdad of the Middle East. These will all flourish. In the Indian Ocean, we see Malacca, and along the Mediterranean, the city of Venice and other Italian city-states will also flourish. And even in Mesoamerica, we see new trade routes in that region, and cities such as Tenochtitlan will develop, and in the Mississippi Valley, the city of Cahokia, which you see there on the right. These are some views of these new trade routes that centered in Mesoamerica, you see there on the left, and in the Andean regions on the right, and not pictured and new to the key concepts this year are trade routes found in the Mississippi River Valley. The growth of interregional trade, especially in luxury goods, was encouraged by several significant innovations in previously existing transportation and communication technologies. And it also developed out of new forms of credit and monetization. So let's take a look at some of these example luxury goods. Silk and cotton textiles were very commonly traded. Things like porcelain, spices, precious metals, and gems. And even things like slaves or exotic animals were traded along these trade routes. New transportation developments come about. The large picture you see here is of a caravanserai, which you can think of as like a motel for traders, usually taking large caravans of camels across the Silk Road. We also see larger ship designs like the Chinese junk ship there at the top right, and new technologies such as the compass and astrolabe, which you see pictured. These transportation technologies help to make trade easier and expand it further. Trade was also helped out by new forms of credit and monetization, the issuance of bills of exchange, the beginning of buying on credit, people issuing checks, the development of banking houses. All of these things helped to improve trade and encourage trade occurring. And in some cases, states even encourage this trade by either minting coins or, as you see pictured here, creating paper money to make trade easier. Instead of lugging around large amounts of coins or gold bars, instead you could just say, hey, take this piece of paper, it represents that. States also built commercial infrastructures. For example, the picture here on the right is of the Grand Canal in China, which was built in this time period. That, of course, encouraged trade along a north-south route in China and helped first the Sui and then later the Tang and the Song dynasties flourish. We also see the beginning of trading organizations. Commercial growth was facilitated by these trading organizations, and the big one to know here is in Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League. Now, the expansion of empires in this time period, which we'll get to later on in our key concepts, facilitates trans-Eurasian trade, and new peoples were drawn into these conquerors' economies and trade networks. There are several empires that expand in this time period, and four big ones that you need to know. The first you see there in the middle, and that is the empire in China, particularly the Tang dynasty. On the far left, you see two more examples, the Islamic caliphates, the Umayyad and later the Abbasid, as well as the Byzantine Empire. And of course, the granddaddy of them all in this time period is the Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in world history. That will facilitate trade during that period of prosperity known as the Pax Mongolica. Of course, the movement of peoples and the creation of trade caused several environmental and linguistic effects. The expansion of long-distance trade often depended on people having knowledge of the environment and making technological adaptations to take advantage of this knowledge. Three big examples from the AP World History course are the Vikings' use of longships, which you see on the far left. They could sail along coasts, they could sail in open waters, and they could even move up rivers, which made trade much easier in several different environments. For the Arabs and Berbers, it was the development of the camel saddle and the use of camels in the Sahara Desert. And as you see on the far right, Central Asian pastoralists used horses on the steppe lands and adapted to those environments. Of course, some of the migrations that we see do have significant environmental impact, and let's look at some of these migrations now. In the top left-hand corner there, you see the Polynesian migrations. These migrations spread Austronesian languages. They spread food and animals, such as chickens, to new islands across the Pacific Ocean. And these took place, of course, over quite some period of time. In the bottom left, you see the Bantu migrations from the region of kind of central Western Africa into Central Africa and into Southern Africa, spreading the Bantu languages, eventually what becomes known as Swahili, and also spreading agriculture and iron technologies. So that is something very significant. You oftentimes see the Bantu migration referred to in AP on AP tests. And of course, the large one you see here is the spread of Turkic peoples between the 5th and 13th centuries. Of course, Turkic and Arab migrations spread Turkish and Arabic, but they also spread technologies. They also spur on continued trade. Now, cross-cultural exchanges were fostered by the intensification of existing and the creation of new networks of trade and communication. And one thing that really helps this out in this time period, and one of our major turning points, is the development of Islam, which were based on the revelations of the Prophet Muhammad and developed in the Arabian Peninsula. The beliefs and practices of Islam were heavily influenced by three Middle Eastern religions, the religion of Judaism, the religion of Christianity, and the religion of Persia, Zoroastrianism. Muslim rule developed in the cities of Mecca and Medina and the surrounding region, and then spread to many parts of Afro-Eurasia through a military expansion. And Islam subsequently expanded through the activities of missionaries, but also merchants, trading merchants. After all, the Prophet Muhammad himself was a merchant. And so Islam's laws were very favorable to trade and very much encouraged trade. And so wherever Islam spreads, trade will also intensify. In key places along important trade routes, merchants would set up communities, and these became known as diasporic communities, where they introduced their own cultural traditions into local indigenous cultures. And there are four major, diasporic communities that the AP wants us to know, and Freemanpedia has a great map showing them. The first is Jewish communities found in the Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, and along the Silk Roads. Chinese merchants also set up diasporic communities, particularly in Southeast Asia, as they traded in those regions. Muslim merchants set up communities, especially along the rim of the Indian Ocean, as they traded further and further away from the traditional Middle Eastern lands. And another one found in Central Asia are diasporic communities of Sogdian merchants. We see kind of these communities pop up all over and form these, again, diasporic communities, which basically just refers to the dispersion of people from their original homeland and forming communities around the world. A lot of what we know in this time period comes from the writings of certain interregional travelers, and the writings of people like Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta or Zhuang help to illustrate the extent to which intercultural knowledge passed from place to place, but also showed limitations of intercultural knowledge and understanding. For example, the writings of Ibn Battuta oftentimes could not comprehend why perhaps Islam might look different in Mali than it did in the Arabian Peninsula. Marco Polo struggled at times to understand Chinese culture and then transmit those findings back to European readers. But these interregional travelers, again, were evidence that trade was not just limited in scope. Some of these people traveled far and wide as these networks expanded and became interregional. Of course, with this increased with trade, it's not just the trade of goods or luxury items, but we also see the diffusion of culture. Literary, artistic, cultural traditions, religions, scientific, and technological innovations all spread. And here you see some of the most significant ones that the AP Key Concepts points to. One example is the spread of Christianity, which continues in Europe in this time period, Christianity reaching Scandinavia around the year 1000. Neo-Confucianism and Buddhism spread throughout East Asia in this time period. Hinduism and Buddhism continues to spread in Southeast Asia. Islam, one of the major turning points for this time period, spreads throughout sub-Saharan Africa and even into Asia along the Silk Road and Indian Ocean maritime system. And even in the Americas, Toltec and Mexican traditions spread through Mesoamerica, and Inca traditions spread through Andean America. Science and technology also spread. Greek and Indian math find a home and are curated by Islamic empires. Greek science and philosophy comes back to Western Europe via Muslims in Iberia and also some rediscovery in the Crusades. And practical things like printing and gunpowder spread from East Asia to the Middle East and later to Western Europe. So this diffusion of cultural traditions and science and technology is going to follow these same trade routes. And is a key understanding that trade does not just occur with goods, but also with ideas. Of course, there was also a diffusion of goods and foods and pathogens in this time period. This shows the diffusion of some of the crops that spread. Here, particularly bananas, which spread from Southeast Asia to Africa in this time period. They will spread even further in our next time period. We have new varieties of rice that spread in East Asia, especially champa rice that spreads from Vietnam to China, is given as tribute to the Chinese emperor. Sugar, cotton, and citrus also spread in the Dar el-Islam and the Mediterranean in this time period. Of course, disease also spreads. The big one in this time period to know is the bubonic plague, which spreads along with Mongol conquests. As the Mongols unite Asia and the Silk Road start up again and have another period, another golden age, it's going to enable disease to spread quickly as well, and it will ultimately decimate large populations, especially in Europe. So that takes us through key concept 3.1. Take a look at our next video as we move forward with this time period review. Thanks.